Kitchen's closed, she snapped, rage coiling tight. 15 suits, snow clinging to their $1,000 coats, stared like she'd announced the apocalypse. A blizzard trapped them. Murphy's Diner was it. Alexander Hayes, some big shot, sneered, "We're not staying here, sweetheart." They had no idea. Emma's gaze flicked to the propane tank, nearly empty, a secret she'd guarded like gold. These men, used to buying everything, were about to learn a hard lesson about survival. But they also didn't see the way she tucked an extra blanket into the booth, remembering her own nights shivering in the cold. She wouldn't let anyone freeze, not even them. And that small kindness, they have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. Before anything else, I need your help. Without your subscription, the algorithm might hide us from each other forever. Your comments and shares are our only hope of staying connected. Follow now to ensure we meet again. And now, let the story unfold. The wind howled like a wounded animal as Emma Rodriguez wiped down the last table at Murphy's Diner, her 23-year-old hands trembling slightly from exhaustion rather than cold. The old building creaked and groaned against the unprecedented December storm that had turned Interstate 87 into a frozen wasteland. Through the frost-covered windows, she could barely make out the highway, where abandoned cars dotted the landscape like scattered toys. "Emma, honey, you should head home before this gets worse," called Murphy from behind the kitchen pass, his weathered face creased with concern. At 72, he'd seen plenty of upstate New York winters, but nothing quite like this. "Can't leave you here alone, Murphy. Besides, my apartment's just as cold as this place." She managed a tired smile, pushing a strand of dark hair behind her ear. The truth was, she couldn't afford to miss even one shift. Not with the diner barely surviving and her mother's medical bills mounting faster than the snow outside. The bell above the door chimed violently as it was pushed open against the wind, bringing with it a swirl of snow and a man in a $1,000 coat that was now completely soaked. He stumbled inside, followed by another equally well-dressed figure, then another. "Jesus Christ, is this place even open?" The first man shook the snow from his dark hair, revealing sharp features and the kind of confidence that came with never hearing the word no. His steel-gray eyes swept the humble diner with obvious distaste. "Kitchen closes in 10 minutes, Emma replied, grabbing a handful of menus. Something about his tone immediately put her on edge. "But given the storm, I suppose we can." "We're not exactly here by choice, sweetheart." His voice carried the unmistakable edge of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Our cars are stuck. All of them." More men in expensive suits began filing through the door, each one shaking off snow and looking more out of place than the last. Emma counted quickly. 15 total. 15 men who looked like they belonged in boardrooms. Not a rundown diner that hadn't seen a renovation since the 1980s. "I'm Alexander Hayes," the first man announced, as if the name should mean something. When Emma's expression remained blank, his eyebrows raised slightly. "Hayes International, Manhattan's largest private equity firm." "I'm Emma Rodriguez, and this is Murphy's Diner. Pleased to meet you." Her tone was polite, but unimpressed. She'd learned long ago that money didn't automatically deserve reverence. Alexander's eyes narrowed slightly. He wasn't used to people who didn't recognize his name, and he certainly wasn't used to being handled with such casual professionalism by service staff. There was something about this girl. "Woman," he corrected himself, noting the way she carried herself with quiet dignity, despite her worn uniform and tired eyes. "We need accommodations for the night," announced another man. This one with perfectly styled silver hair and a watch that cost more than most people's cars. "The highway patrol says nothing's moving until morning." Murphy emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. "Well, gentlemen, this ain't exactly the Ritz-Carlton, but you're welcome to wait out the storm. Emma, get these folks some coffee and whatever's left from dinner service." "Actually," Emma said, studying the group with growing realization, "you might want to call ahead to the hotels in town. This storm's been building all day and already tried." Alexander interrupted, pulling out his phone. "No signal. Nothing." "The cell tower went down about an hour ago," Murphy confirmed. "Storm took out the landlines, too. Happens every few years up here." Emma watched as the reality of the situation settled over the group. These were clearly men who were used to having solutions bought and delivered immediately. The concept of being genuinely stuck was foreign to them. "So what exactly are you suggesting?" Alexander's tone had shifted from annoyance to something approaching concern. I'm suggesting you settle in, Emma replied, already moving toward the coffee pot. Because unless you're planning to walk 15 miles through a blizzard in those shoes, you're spending the night here. One of the men, younger with nervous energy, laughed awkwardly. She can't be serious. There has to be somewhere else. A hotel, a motel, anything. Closest hotel is the Valley Inn, 12 miles north, Murphy said matter-of-factly. But Route 9 is completely impassable. State patrols calling it the worst storm in 20 years. Emma began filling coffee cups with practiced efficiency, observing the group as she worked. They were all clearly successful, probably used to first-class everything, and now they were stuck in a small-town diner with mismatched furniture and a jukebox that only played country music from the 90s. This is ridiculous, muttered a man with a British accent. I have a board meeting tomorrow morning. We all have obligations, Alexander said sharply, but his eyes kept drifting to Emma as she moved between tables. There was something about the way she handled the crisis. No panic, no drama, just quiet competence. It was refreshing, actually. Coffee's fresh, Emma announced, setting down cups around the largest table. We've got some leftover chili sandwiches, and Murphy makes a mean apple pie. Not exactly gourmet, but it's warm. How much? Alexander asked, reaching for his wallet. Emma paused, studying him. For coffee during a life-threatening storm. It's called hospitality, Mr. Hayes. I wasn't planning to charge you for basic human decency. A few of the men exchanged glances. They weren't used to generosity without strings attached, especially from people who clearly needed the money. That's very kind, Alexander said carefully, but we can certainly pay for. You can pay by not treating this place like it's beneath you, Emma replied evenly, meeting his gaze directly. We may not have marble floors and crystal chandeliers, but we've got better coffee than most places in Manhattan, and enough heart to help strangers on the worst night of the year. The silence that followed was broken only by the wind rattling the windows. Alexander felt something unexpected, a flush of shame. When was the last time someone had called him out so elegantly? You're right, he admitted, surprising both himself and his colleagues. That was presumptuous of me. Thank you for the hospitality, Emma. She nodded once, accepting the apology with grace. I'll get those sandwiches started. Murphy, can you help me with the sleeping arrangements? Sleeping arrangements? The silver-haired man looked alarmed. Well, you're not sleeping in your cars in sub-zero temperatures, Emma said practically. We've got some CS in the storage room, and the heat works better back here than probably anywhere else in town right now. As Emma disappeared into the kitchen with Murphy, the 15 men sat in stunned silence. They'd gone from luxury sedan to small-town diner, from five-star hotel expectations to camping out on CS. And somehow the young woman, with kind eyes and a sharp tongue, had made it seem not just acceptable, but almost reasonable. She's got spine, I'll give her that, murmured someone. Alexander found himself nodding, still staring at the kitchen door where Emma had vanished. In his 38 years, he'd met countless people who either feared him or wanted something from him. Emma Rodriguez was the first person in recent memory who seemed to see him as just a person. Her somewhat rude person who needed coffee and shelter, nothing more. The evening passed in an increasingly surreal atmosphere. Emma and Murphy worked tirelessly to make their unexpected guests comfortable, setting up makeshift sleeping areas, keeping the coffee flowing, and somehow managing to feed 15 hungry billionaires with whatever was left in the kitchen. Alexander watched it all with growing fascination. Every interaction he'd ever had with service staff had been transactional, polite, efficient, but ultimately about money exchanging hands. This was different. Emma moved through the diner like she genuinely cared about their comfort, asking about dietary restrictions, making sure everyone had enough blankets, even tuning the radio to find better music. You don't have to go to all this trouble, he told her as she refilled his cup for the fourth time around midnight. It's not trouble, she replied simply. It's just what you do for people. Even people you don't know. People who could be criminals for all you know. Emma tilted her head, considering him. Are you criminals? Well, some of us are investment bankers, so that's debatable. Alexander found himself joking. The small smile that crossed Emma's face was worth more than any business deal he'd closed that year. I'll take my chances with investment bankers over freezing to death in a blizzard. You're not what I expected, he said quietly. And what did you expect? I don't know. Someone more impressed, intimidated. Most people, when they find out what I do, what I'm worth. Money doesn't change the fact that you're stuck in a snowstorm. Same as everyone else. Emma interrupted gently. Tonight you're just Alexander, and you needed help. Everything else is just noise. Alexander stared at her for a long moment. When was the last time someone had used his first name without wanting something from him? When was the last time someone had treated him like just Alexander? What about you? He asked. What's your story, Emma Rodriguez? Something flickered across her face, too quick to interpret, but unmistakably guarded. Not much of a story to tell. Born here, work here, trying to keep this place running. College, some single word carried a weight that suggested a more complex truth. Boyfriend? Emma's laugh was soft, but carried an edge. Do I look like I have time for complications like that? Before Alexander could respond, Murphy's voice boomed from across the diner. Emma, coffee pot's acting up again. Duty calls, she said, already moving away. Alexander watched her go, noting how she moved with unconscious grace despite her obvious exhaustion. There was a story there. He could feel it. In his business, reading people was survival, and Emma Rodriguez had layers that intrigued him far more than they should. The night stretched on, and slowly the atmosphere shifted. These titans of industry, stripped of their usual power and comfort, began talking to each other like actual human beings. Stories were shared, jokes were made, and somewhere around 2 a.m., Emma found herself actually laughing at something the British investor said about his first day in New York. You know, said David Chen, a tech mogul from Silicon Valley, this is the first genuine conversation I've had in months that wasn't about profit margins or stock prices. That's because you're not in your usual environment, Emma observed, settling into a chair with her own cup of coffee. No assistants to filter everything, no agendas to follow, just people being people. Very philosophical for 2 a.m., Alexander commented, but his tone was admiring rather than mocking. Murphy says, I think too much. Occupational hazard of the night shift. Emma's eyes met his across the table. Lots of time to observe people when you're invisible to them. Invisible service staff usually are to people like you where background noise part of the scenery. She wasn't bitter about it, just matter of fact. Alexander felt another uncomfortable stab of recognition. How many waitresses, cleaning ladies, receptionists had he walked past without seeing? How many Emmers had served him coffee without him ever noticing they were actual people with thoughts and dreams? That's probably true, he admitted, and probably wrong of us. Emma studied him with those dark, intelligent eyes. Probably. As dawn approached and the storm finally began to subside, Emma made breakfast for all 15 men. Scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, and the best coffee Alexander had ever tasted. The conversation had evolved throughout the night from polite small talk to genuine connection, and now there was an easy camaraderie that felt almost surreal. This has been Alexander's struggle to find words as he prepared to leave. Expensive, Emma suggested with a small smirk. Life-changing, he finished seriously. Emma's smile faltered slightly. She'd seen that look before. Wealthy men who confused gratitude with attraction, who mistook her kindness for availability. Well, I hope your drive back to the city is safe, Mr. Hayes. The formal address was deliberate, creating distance. Alexander felt it immediately and found himself oddly disappointed. Alexander, he corrected. After last night, I think we're past the formalities. Have a good life, Alexander, Emma said gently but firmly, already starting to clear the tables. Alexander wanted to say something more, but the other men were already heading for their cars. The storm had passed, the highways were being cleared, and reality was reasserting itself. He was a billionaire CEO, and she was a small-town waitress. What had happened here was beautiful, but temporary, like the snow that would melt by afternoon. Except as he walked to his car, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving something important behind. 3 weeks later, Emma was still trying to process what had happened to her life. The morning after the storm, When a 135 luxury cars had descended on Murphy's diner, she'd thought she was hallucinating from exhaustion. Reporters, photographers, and curiosity seekers had followed, turning her quiet workplace into chaos. Murphy's diner had gone viral overnight. Billionaires Blizzard was trending, and everyone wanted to know about the angel waitress who'd opened her doors to stranded moguls. The increased business should have been a blessing, but Emma felt overwhelmed by the attention. "Order up," Murphy called, sliding plates across the pass. His arthritis had been bothering him more lately, and Emma worried about him keeping up with the sudden influx of customers. "Coming!" Emma grabbed the plates and navigated through the crowded diner. A month ago, their biggest rush was the Sunday after church crowd. Now they had lines out the door and reservation requests for a place that had never taken reservations. The bell chimed, and Emma glanced up from taking an order, her breath catching as she recognized the man in the expensive overcoat. Alexander Hayes stood in the doorway, looking as confident and put together as he had 3 weeks ago. But something in his expression was different. Less arrogant, more uncertain. "Mr. Hayes," she said politely, finishing with her current table before approaching him. "Back for more of that life-changing coffee." "Something like that." His smile was tentative. "Actually, I was hoping we could talk." "I'm working," Emma replied, not unkindly, but clearly setting boundaries. "But if you'd like a table, I can seat you." Alexander glanced around the crowded diner, noting how every conversation had stopped the moment he walked in. People were staring, some not so subtly, taking pictures with their phones. Perhaps somewhere more private. Emma's expression cooled slightly. "This is a diner, not a private club. If you want privacy, there's probably somewhere more your speed in Manhattan." "That came out wrong," Alexander said quickly. "I meant the attention. It must be difficult for you, all this sudden fame." Emma studied his face, searching for signs of the condescension she'd grown used to from customers who'd seen her story on the news. Instead, she found what looked like genuine concern. "It's been challenging," she admitted, "but good for business." "Is it?" Alexander gestured toward a corner table that had just cleared. 5 minutes, please." Against her better judgment, Emma nodded. She led him to the table and sat across from him, very aware that every eye in the diner was tracking their conversation. "You didn't give any interviews," Alexander observed. "Wasn't any of their business what happened that night? Most people in your situation would have capitalized on the attention, book deals, talk show appearances, sponsorship opportunities." Emma's laugh was soft but humorless. "And what situation is that exactly, Mr. Hayes? Please call me Alexander." "And I meant, well, clearly money is tight. The diner, your mother's medical expenses." Emma's spine went rigid. "I'm sorry. What did you just say?" Alexander realized his mistake immediately. In his world, background checks and financial assessments were standard procedure before any meaningful interaction. He'd forgotten that normal people considered such things invasive. "I didn't mean you had me investigated. It wasn't a question. It's standard practice when what? When you're slumming with the help." Emma's voice was quiet but deadly. "When you decide to play philanthropist with the poor little waitress." "That's not." Alexander ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. He was usually articulate, but something about Emma made his thoughts scatter. "I was concerned about you, the attention, the reporters. I wanted to make sure you were okay. So you invaded my privacy instead of just asking. I know how this looks, but it looks like you think I'm a charity case who can't take care of herself." Emma said, standing. "It looks like you think I'm so far beneath you that you need a full financial report before deciding whether I'm worth your concern." "Emma, please, thank you for your visit, Mr. Hayes. Enjoy the coffee." She walked away, leaving Alexander sitting alone at the corner table with the distinct feeling that he'd just blown something important. From behind the kitchen pass, Murphy watched the interaction with knowing eyes. He'd seen plenty of rich folks come through over the years, usually lost or slumming, but he'd also seen the way Alexander had looked at Emma that night during the storm, like a man seeing sunlight for the first time. "Strike out," Murphy asked when Alexander approached the counter to pay. "Completely," Alexander admitted. "I wanted to help her, and instead I insulted her." "Help her with what exactly?" Alexander gestured vaguely. "The medical bills, the diner's finances." It wouldn't be difficult, son. Let me stop you right there, Murphy interrupted. Emma's got more pride than most folks got money. You want to help her? Treat her like an equal, not a problem to be solved. I don't understand. Murphy studied Alexander with sharp eyes that had seen decades of human nature. You're used to buying your way out of problems? Can't buy your way into trust? Then how do I fix this? You don't fix it. You earn it. Murphy poured himself a cup of coffee. That girl's been hurt before by men who thought money made them better than her. Prove you're different. How? That's for you to figure out. But I'll tell you this. Emma's got a degree from Columbia in international business and speaks 4 languages. She's working here because sometimes life kicks you when you're down, not because she can't do better. Alexander felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Columbia, 4 languages, international business. The woman he'd been unconsciously condescending to was probably more educated than half his board of directors. Why didn't she say anything? Would you? Murphy challenged. When every stranger assumes you're stupid because you're serving them coffee, when showing you're overqualified for your job just makes people uncomfortable. Alexander left the diner with his head spinning. Emma Rodriguez was a puzzle he couldn't solve with money or power, and for the first time in years, he found himself genuinely intrigued by another person. Meanwhile, Emma was in the kitchen, aggressively cleaning an already spotless grill. You okay, honey? Murphy asked gently. Fine, Emma replied curtly, then sighed. I hate that he had me investigated, Murphy. Hate that he thinks I need rescuing. Maybe he thinks he needs rescuing. Emma looked up, surprised. What do you mean? 30 years I've been watching people, Emma. That boy's got everything money can buy and nothing money can't. You think he drove 2 hours in a storm just to check on business for the diner? He feels guilty. Rich man's conscience acting up after seeing how the other half lives. Maybe. Or maybe for the first time in his life, someone treated him like a human being instead of a bank account, and he can't stop thinking about it. Emma considered this, remembering the way Alexander had looked during the storm. Not arrogant or demanding, but almost lonely, like someone who'd forgotten what genuine connection felt like. Doesn't matter, she said finally. People like him don't end up with people like me. That's not how the world works. Honey, Murphy said with a gentle smile, sometimes the world surprises you. Emma wanted to believe that, but life had taught her to be practical about fairy tales. Rich men didn't fall for waitresses, no matter how many romantic comedies suggested otherwise. They had their adventures, then returned to their appropriate partners in their appropriate worlds. Still, she couldn't deny that something about Alexander Hayes had gotten under her skin. The way he'd looked genuinely ashamed when she'd called out his assumptions. The way he'd admitted fault instead of defending his actions. In her experience, powerful men rarely apologize for anything. But she'd learned the hard way that thinking too much about what-ifs was a dangerous game. She had responsibilities, bills to pay, and a life to rebuild. Romance was a luxury she couldn't afford, especially with someone whose world was so completely different from hers. What Emma didn't know was that 200 memoirs south, Alexander Hayes was having the same thoughts in reverse. He'd built an empire by reading people, understanding their motivations, predicting their behavior. But everything he thought he knew about human nature had been challenged by one night in a snowstorm and a waitress who served coffee with a side of uncomfortable truth. For the first time in 15 years, Alexander Hayes couldn't stop thinking about someone other than business. And for the first time in his adult life, he had absolutely no idea what to do about it. The package arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by a courier who looked like he'd never been north of the Bronx. Emma signed for it with curiosity, noting the expensive paper and the return address that simply read, Hayes International, Manhattan. Inside was a check for $50,000 made out to Murphy's Diner, along with a handwritten note on letterhead that probably cost more than Emma made in a week. Emma, this isn't charity. It's payment for services rendered during the storm, plus compensation for the inconvenience our unexpected arrival caused your business. Please accept it in the spirit it's intended. Alexander P.S., I've been thinking about what you said regarding treating people as equals. You were right. I'm still learning. Emma stared at the check for a full minute before walking to the kitchen. Murphy, we have a problem. She showed him the check in the note. Murphy whistled low under his breath. Well, that's a generous gesture. It's manipulation, Emma said firmly. He thinks he can buy his way back into my good graces. Maybe. Or maybe he's trying to show you he learned something. Murphy studied the note. Says here it's not charity. $50,000 for one night of coffee and sandwiches. Come on, Murphy. That's exactly what charity looks like when rich people want to feel good about themselves. Emma was still fuming when the phone rang 2 hours later. Murphy's diner. This is Emma. Please don't hang up. Alexander's voice was immediate, urgent. I know you got the check, and I know you think money solves everything, Emma replied coolly. But you can't buy forgiveness, Mr. Hayes. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? Silence stretched between them. Emma could hear traffic in the background. He was probably calling from his car between meetings, treating this like another business transaction to be managed. I can't stop thinking about that night, Alexander said finally, his voice quieter. Not because of the storm or the inconvenience, but because of you. The way you treated us treated me like I was worth helping, without expecting anything in return. So you had me investigated, so I panicked. The admission surprised them both. Emma, in my world, everyone wants something. Everyone has an angle. When someone is genuinely kind, without expecting payment, I don't know how to process it. The investigation wasn't about you being beneath me. It was about me not understanding how someone could be that good. Emma found herself gripping the phone tighter. There was something in his voice she hadn't heard before. Vulnerability, maybe real uncertainty. The check isn't about charity, Alexander continued. It's about respect. You provided a service that night that went far beyond food and shelter. You reminded 15 jaded businessmen what human decency looks like. That's worth more than $50,000, but it's what I can offer. You could have just said thank you. I tried. You walked away because you treated me like a curiosity instead of a person. You're right again. Alexander's laugh was Rafal. I have a habit of making the wrong choices with you. Despite herself, Emma felt her anger softening. Why does it matter what I think of you? I don't know, Alexander answered honestly. That's what's driving me crazy. Emma closed her eyes, feeling something dangerous stirring in her chest. Hope, the one emotion she'd promised herself she couldn't afford. Mr. Hayes, Alexander, please. Alexander, I can't cash this check. Why not? Because accepting money from you changes things between us. Makes this about debt and obligation instead of... She trailed off, realizing she was about to admit more than she intended. Instead of what? Instead of whatever this conversation actually is. Alexander was quiet for a moment. Then don't cash it, but don't send it back either. Keep it as insurance for your mother's medical expenses, for the diner, for whatever you need. No strings attached. There are always strings attached. Not this time. Emma wanted to believe him, but experience had taught her that men like Alexander Hayes didn't give away $50,000 without expectations. What do you want from me? She asked directly. Honestly, I want to take you to dinner. Somewhere nice where we can have a real conversation without reporters or customers or complications. I work nights, lunch then, or coffee or hell, a walk in Central Park. I just want to see you again without feeling like I'm disappointing you. The honesty in his voice nearly undid her resolve. Why? Because in 38 years, you're the first person who made me want to be better than I am. Emma's heart did something dangerous in her chest. This was exactly the kind of thinking that had gotten her in trouble before, believing that she could somehow save or change a man, believing that she was special enough to be worth the effort. Alexander, she said carefully, you don't know anything about me. Real me, not the saint the newspapers made up. If you knew the truth, then tell me the truth. It's not that simple. Why not? Because the truth was that Emma Rodriguez had once been Emma Elizabeth Ashford, heir to a hotel fortune that had been systematically destroyed by corporate raiders because she'd fled Manhattan 3 years ago after discovering her fiancé's betrayal and her family's business partner's theft, because she was working at Murphy's Diner. Not just to survive, but to hide from the world that had chewed her up and spit her out. Because if Alexander knew who she really was, he'd realize that the woman he was pursuing was the same woman whose family's empire he'd helped dismantle when he'd backed Jonathan Ashford's hostile takeover of Ashford International 3 years ago. "Emma, are you there?" "I'm here," she managed. "Alexander, this is complicated in ways you can't imagine. Then help me understand." "I can't. Not yet. Maybe not ever." "What if I'm willing to wait?" The question hung between them like a bridge. Emma wasn't sure she was brave enough to cross. Part of her wanted to tell him everything, the truth about her identity, about how their lives had been connected long before that stormy night. But another part, the part that had learned to protect itself, knew that some bridges burned you when you tried to cross them. "I need time," she said finally. "Time I can give you pressure I can't seem to stop myself from applying." Alexander's laugh was self-deprecating. "Fair warning, I'm not very good at wanting things I can't have, and I'm not very good at being wanted for the wrong reasons." What would the right reasons be? Emma closed her eyes, remembering the way he'd looked at her during the storm. Not like a conquest or a project, but like someone he was genuinely glad to know. "Figure that out, and maybe we'll talk." After she hung up, Emma stared at the check for a long time. $50,000, enough to catch up on her mother's treatments, enough to help Murphy update the equipment, enough to breathe a little easier. But accepting it felt like accepting something else, something she wasn't ready for. Murphy found her 20 minutes later, still staring at the check. "What you gonna do?" "I don't know," Emma admitted. "Taking the money feels wrong, but we need it. Not taking it feels like pride getting in the way of practicality." "What does your gut tell you?" Emma's gut told her that Alexander Hayes was dangerous to her carefully reconstructed peace of mind. Her gut told her that no matter how sincere he seemed, getting involved with him would eventually lead to heartbreak. Her gut also told her that she was already more involved than she wanted to admit. "My gut tells me I'm in trouble either way." Murphy nodded thoughtfully. "You know, in 50 years of marriage," my Sarah used to say, "the biggest mistake people make is assuming they can predict how love stories end." "This isn't a love story, Murphy, isn't it?" Murphy's eyes twinkled. Boy drives 2 hours through questionable weather just to apologize for a conversation that went badly. Sends money he knows you won't take just to prove he's listening to what you said. That sounds like the beginning of something to me, or the beginning of a disaster. "Sometimes they're the same thing," Murphy said with a shrug. "Question is, you going to let fear make your choices, or you going to see what happens when you give someone a chance to surprise you?" Emma looked out the window at the December sky, clear and blue after weeks of gray. The storm had passed, but somehow she felt like she was still standing in the middle of one. Only this time, the weather outside wasn't the thing threatening to uproot her life. "What if he hurts me?" she whispered. "What if he doesn't?" Murphy counted gently. That evening, Emma made a decision. She called the number on Alexander's business card, reaching his personal assistant. "This is Emma Rodriguez. Please tell Mr. Hayes that I'll keep the check in trust for the diner, but I won't cash it unless we genuinely need it. And tell him if he wants to have lunch sometime, he can call me. But no investigators, no background checks, no research. Just two people having a conversation." 2 days later, Alexander called. "Lunch?" he said without preamble when Emma answered. "Hello to you too." "Sorry, hello, Emma. How are you? Would you like to have lunch with me?" Emma smiled despite herself. "Better." "Yes, I would. But I picked the place." "Deal?" "Where?" "Rossetti. It's a little Italian place about 20 minutes from here. Nothing fancy, but the lasagna's incredible." "Sounds perfect, Alexander." "Yeah, no suit. And you're paying your own bill." Alexander's laugh was warm and genuine. "Yes, ma'am." As Emma hung up, she felt the first flutter of something that might have been hope. Maybe Murphy was right. Maybe sometimes the best love stories were the ones you never saw coming. But as she marked her calendar for their lunch date, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to step into something that would change everything. And she still hadn't decided whether that was something to anticipate or fear. What she didn't know was that Alexander was having the same thoughts, sitting in his Manhattan office and staring at his calendar like it held the answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. For both of them, lunch couldn't come soon enough, and both of them suspected that everything would be different afterward. Rossetti's Italian kitchen was exactly what Emma had promised. Nothing fancy, but the kind of place where the owner's grandmother's recipes still guided every dish. Alexander arrived 10 minutes early, having driven himself in a simple sedan instead of his usual chauffeur-driven Mercedes. He'd also followed Emma's instructions about the suit, opting instead for dark jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably still cost more than most people's monthly salary, but at least looked less intimidating. Emma walked in precisely on time, and Alexander felt his breath catch. Without her work uniform, she looked different, more polished, more confident. She wore a simple black dress that hugged her curves modestly, and her dark hair fell in waves around her shoulders. But it was her smile, genuine and slightly nervous, that made his heart skip. "You clean up nice," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "You look beautiful," Alexander replied, then immediately worried he'd been too forward. But Emma's smile widened. "Thank you. I have to admit, it's nice to be somewhere that smells like garlic instead of French fry oil." Their conversation started tentatively, but quickly found its rhythm. Alexander had worried they'd have nothing to talk about outside the crisis that had brought them together. But Emma was fascinating. She spoke intelligently about everything from current events to literature, and her observations about people and human nature were sharp and insightful. "You really did study at Columbia," Alexander said, not making it a question. "International business summa cum laude," Emma confirmed, twirling pasta around her fork. "Minor in art history, and you ended up at Murphy's because Emma's fork paused halfway to her mouth." This was the moment she'd been dreading, the point where she'd have to decide how much truth to share. "Life happens," she said carefully. "Sometimes plans change." Alexander sensed there was more to the story, but he'd learned his lesson about pushing too hard. "Fair enough. We all have things we'd rather not discuss." "What about you?" Emma asked, deflecting. "Always wanted to be a corporate raider." "Private equity?" Alexander corrected with a slight smile, "though I suppose the distinction is semantic. And no, actually, I wanted to be a teacher when I was a kid. High school history." Emma's surprise was genuine. "What changed?" "My father died when I was 17. Heart attack left my mother with a lot of debt and very few options." Alexander's voice grew distant. "I realize that good intentions don't pay bills or secure futures. Money does." "I'm sorry," Emma said softly. "That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was educational," Alexander replied, then seemed to catch himself. "Sorry that sounded cold. It's just, I learned early that the world doesn't care about your dreams if you can't afford to chase them." Emma felt a sharp pang of recognition. How many times had she thought similar thoughts over the past 3 years? "But you must enjoy what you do now," she said. "The power, the success." Alexander considered this. "I'm good at it. I'm good at reading companies, seeing their weaknesses, maximizing their potential." "But enjoy," he paused. "Until recently, I'd forgotten there was supposed to be a difference between being good at something and enjoying it." "What changed recently?" Alexander met her eyes directly. "I met someone who reminded me that there's more to life than profit margins." The intensity of his gaze made Emma's cheeks warm. She looked down at her plate, suddenly very interested in her lasagna. "Alexander," she said carefully, "what are you looking for here with me?" "I mean, honestly, I don't know." His laugh was self-deprecating. "For that probably sounds pathetic from a man who makes decisions worth millions every day. But you've made me question everything I thought I knew about what I wanted." Emma felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. This vulnerable, uncertain version of Alexander was far more dangerous to her peace of mind than the arrogant businessman had been. "That's not fair," she whispered. "What's not fair?" "Being charming, being real, making me want to." She stopped herself. "Want to what? Trust you?" Emma finished quietly. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the admission hanging between them. Alexander reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "You can trust me, Emma." Emma looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. For a moment, she almost believed him, almost believed that maybe somehow they could find a way to make this work despite everything that stood between them. Then her phone rang. Emma glanced at the screen and her face went pale. "I have to take this," she said, pulling her hand away. "It's the hospital." Alexander watched as Emma stepped outside to take the call, noting how her posture changed, becoming tense and worried. Through the window he could see her pacing, one hand pressed to her forehead in obvious distress. When she returned to the table 5 minutes later, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'm sorry," she said, grabbing her purse. "I have to go." "My mother, there's been a complication with her treatment." "What hospital?" Alexander asked, already standing. "I'll drive you." "No, that's not. You don't need to." Emma was clearly flustered, trying to maintain composure while her world tilted. "Emma!" Alexander's voice was gentle but firm. "Let me help." The drive to Albany Medical Center passed in tense silence. Emma sat rigid in the passenger seat, staring out the window while Alexander navigated traffic with the efficiency of someone accustomed to crisis management. "She's going to be okay," he said quietly as they pulled into the hospital parking lot. "You don't know that," Emma replied, but her voice lacked conviction. She was scared and trying not to show it. "No, I don't," Alexander admitted, "but I know that whatever happens, you don't have to face it alone." Emma looked at him, then really looked, and saw something in his expression that made her chest tight. Concern, yes, but also something deeper, something that looked like genuine care. At the hospital, Emma was quickly whisked away by medical staff, leaving Alexander alone in the waiting room with his thoughts. He'd meant what he said about her not facing this alone. But as he sat among the sterile chairs and medical equipment, he realized he had no right to make such promises. He was essentially a stranger who'd had lunch with her. What was he doing here? An hour later, Emma emerged from the ICU, looking exhausted but relieved. "She's stable," she said, sinking into the chair beside him. "They think it was just a reaction to the new medication. They're going to monitor her overnight, but the doctor says she should be fine." "Thank God," Alexander said and meant it. Emma turned to study his face. "You waited." "Of course, I waited. You barely know me." "I know enough," Alexander replied simply. Emma felt something shift inside her chest, a wall she'd carefully maintained beginning to crumble. This man, who could have been anywhere doing anything, had spent 2 hours in a hospital waiting room for someone he barely knew, simply because she'd needed him to. "Alexander," she began, then stopped as she noticed someone approaching them. The man was tall, impeccably dressed with silver hair, and the kind of confident bearing that came from a lifetime of privilege. He looked familiar, though Emma couldn't immediately place him. "Alexander Hayes," the man said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Fancy meeting you here." Alexander's entire body went rigid. "Jonathan!" Emma felt the blood drain from her face as recognition hit her like a physical blow. Jonathan Ashford, her former fiancé, the man who'd betrayed her family and destroyed everything she'd ever loved. "Emma Elizabeth Ashford," Jonathan said, his voice carrying a note of cruel satisfaction. "Or are you going by Rodriguez these days? How quaint." Alexander looked between them, confusion and something that might have been dread crossing his features. "You two know each other?" "Oh, we know each other very well," Jonathan replied smoothly. "Emma and I were engaged 3 years ago, before her family lost everything. Of course, before she disappeared like a coward instead of facing the consequences of her father's poor business decisions." "That's not what happened," Emma said quietly, her voice steadier than she felt. "Isn't it?" Jonathan's smile was vicious. "Tell me, Emma, have you informed Mr. Hayes about your little secret? About who you really are?" Alexander was looking at Emma now, and she could see the questions forming in his eyes, the pieces clicking together in a way that would destroy everything. "Emma Elizabeth Ashford," Alexander said slowly, understanding dawning. "Ashford International." "The very same," Jonathan confirmed. "Though I doubt she's mentioned that particular family connection, or the fact that you, my dear Alexander, were instrumental in helping me acquire her father's company 3 years ago." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma watched as Alexander's face went through a series of emotions: shock, recognition, and finally something that looked like betrayal. "You knew," he said to Emma, his voice barely above a whisper. You knew who I was, what I'd done, and you never said anything. Alexander, I can explain. Can you? Jonathan interrupted, clearly enjoying the drama. Can you explain how you've been lying to him from the moment you met, playing the innocent waitress when you're actually the privileged princess who couldn't handle losing her silver spoon? That's enough, Alexander said sharply, his protective instincts overriding his shock. But the damage was done. Emma could see it in Alexander's eyes. The trust they'd been building was shattered. He was looking at her like he didn't know her at all. I need some air, Emma said quietly and walked away before either man could respond. Alexander started to follow her, but Jonathan caught his arm. Let her go, Jonathan said. Trust me, you're better off without the complications she brings. Emma's always been good at playing the victim, but the truth is, she's exactly like every other spoiled rich girl who's never had to work for anything. This little waitress act, it's just another performance. Alexander shook off Jonathan's hand, his jaw tight with anger. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? I was engaged to her, Alexander. I know exactly what kind of person Emma Ashford is underneath all that false modesty. She's manipulative, self-centered, and completely incapable of handling real adversity. The moment things got difficult, she ran away and left her family to deal with the mess. And you had nothing to do with creating that mess. Jonathan's smile faltered slightly. Business is business. If Richard Ashford couldn't handle the competition? Alexander's voice was dangerously quiet. Is that what we're calling fraud now? I have no idea what you're implying, but I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Facts that I should have looked into more carefully 3 years ago. Alexander stepped closer to Jonathan, his voice dropping to a level that made other people in the waiting room glance over nervously. Stay away from Emma. Stay away from her family. And if I find out you've done anything to hurt her or her mother, you'll discover exactly how unpleasant I can make your life. Alexander left Jonathan standing in the hospital corridor and went to find Emma. He found her in the parking lot, sitting on a bench outside the main entrance, staring at the ground. Emma, she looked up and he could see she'd been crying. I suppose you have questions? Just one, Alexander said, sitting beside her. Why didn't you tell me? Emma was quiet for a long moment. Because I was afraid of exactly this, that you'd look at me differently, that you'd think I'd been using you or lying to you or playing some kind of game. Were you? No. The word was immediate and fierce. Alexander, that night at the diner when you walked in, I had no idea who you were. Yes, I recognized your name when you introduced yourself, but I didn't connect it to what happened to my family until later. And by then, I was already what? Already falling for you, Emma whispered. Alexander felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. Emma, look at me. She raised her eyes to his, and he could see all the fear and vulnerability she'd been hiding. I don't care who you used to be, he said quietly. I don't care about your family's money or your connections or any of that. The woman I've gotten to know, the woman who opened her diner to strangers in a storm, who works 12-hour shifts to take care of people she loves, who treats everyone with dignity regardless of their station. That's who you are. Everything else is just history. But you helped him, Emma said, her voice breaking slightly. You helped Jonathan destroy my family's company. I backed a business deal without doing my due diligence, Alexander replied grimly. If Jonathan committed fraud, and I'm beginning to suspect he did, then I was as much a victim as anyone else. But Emma, I need you to know something. If I had known then what I know now, if I had known that backing that deal would hurt you. He reached out to touch her face gently. I would never have done it. Emma leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. I'm so tired of running, she whispered. Then stop running, Alexander said simply. Stay and fight with me. Emma opened her eyes and looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who'd driven her to the hospital, who'd waited for hours in uncomfortable chairs, who just promised to stand with her against the world. Maybe Murphy was right. Maybe sometimes the world did surprise you. Okay, she said quietly, but there's something else you need to know about my mother, about why I'm really here. Tell me. She doesn't know who I really am. After everything fell apart, After I discovered what Jonathan had done, I couldn't. I couldn't face telling her that I'd been so stupid, so blind. So I became Emma Rodriguez, and I've been sending money for her medical care without her knowing it comes from me. Alexander processed this information, understanding dawning. The medical expenses, Murphy mentioned, you've been paying them with what was left of my trust fund. Yes, but it's running out, and her condition is getting worse, and I don't know what I'm going to do. Emma's voice cracked. I can't lose her, Alexander. She's all I have left. Alexander pulled Emma into his arms, holding her tightly as she finally let herself cry for everything she'd lost. Everything she'd been carrying alone for 3 years. You're not alone anymore, he murmured against her hair. Whatever happens next, we'll figure it out together. As he held her, Alexander's mind was already working, formulating plans. Jonathan Ashford had destroyed Emma's life once, but he wouldn't get the chance to do it again. It was time for some long overdue justice. But first, Alexander had a phone call to make. His lawyers were about to get very busy. 3 days later, Alexander's Manhattan office felt like a war room. Legal documents covered his massive oak desk, and his top attorneys worked with the intensity of generals planning a campaign. Emma sat in the leather chair across from his desk, watching Alexander pace as he spoke rapidly into his phone. I don't care how many favors you have to call in, Alexander was saying. I want every document related to the Ashford International acquisition. Every email, every memo, every coffee-stained napkin that might have Jonathan's signature on it. We're going to take that bastard apart piece by piece. Emma still couldn't quite believe she was here in Alexander's world, fighting back instead of hiding. After their conversation at the hospital, she'd expected to feel more conflicted about accepting his help. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Hope. Alexander ended his call and turned to her. My investigative team found something interesting in Jonathan's financial records. It seems he's been living far beyond what his legitimate income should support. What does that mean? It means he's been siphoning money from somewhere, and I have a strong suspicion that somewhere is the accounts he was supposed to be managing for your family's company. Alexander's smile was sharp as a blade. We're going to prove he committed fraud, Emma, and when we do, we're going to get back every penny he stole. Emma felt a surge of something that might have been vindication. Can we really do that? We can, and we will. Alexander sat on the edge of his desk, looking down at her intently. But I need you to be prepared for what this means. Once we file these charges, your story is going to become public. The media attention will be intense. Your identity as Emma Ashford will come out. Emma took a deep breath considering this. What about my mother? We'll tell her together before any of this goes public. She deserves to know the truth, Emma, and she deserves to know how extraordinary her daughter really is. She's going to be so disappointed in me. She's going to be proud of you, Alexander corrected firmly. You survived losing everything, rebuilt your life from nothing, and took care of her without her even knowing it. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's heroic. Emma felt tears prick at her eyes. How had she gotten so lucky to find someone who saw her so clearly? There's something else, Alexander continued, his tone becoming more gentle about us. About what happens after we expose Jonathan. Emma's stomach clenched. Here it comes, she thought. The part where he realizes that being with her means being connected to scandal and drama. I know this complicates things, she said quickly. If you want to step back until this is all resolved, I understand. This is going to be messy, and you have your reputation to think about. Emma, Alexander's voice cut through her rambling. Stop. She looked up at him, bracing herself for rejection. The only complication I'm worried about, Alexander said, moving to kneel in front of her chair, is whether you're ready for everyone to know that Alexander Hayes is completely, irrevocably in love with Emma Ashford. Emma's breath caught. What did you just say? I love you, Alexander repeated, taking her hands in his. I love your strength, your kindness, your intelligence. I love the way you make me want to be better than I am. I love that you see people for who they really are, not what they can do for you. I love that you make the best coffee in upstate New York and that you can reduce pompous billionaires to apologetic schoolboys with a single look. Emma laughed through her tears. Alexander, I love that you're brave enough to start over when life knocks you down. And I love that you're trusting me enough to stop running and start fighting. He brought her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I love you, Emma, and I don't care who knows it. Even when the media finds out that you're in love with a woman who was engaged to the man you're about to destroy in court. Especially then, Alexander said with a grin that was both tender and fierce. Let them write whatever they want. The only opinion that matters to me is yours. Emma stared at him for a long moment. This man who'd somehow seen past every wall she'd built and decided she was worth fighting for. I love you too, she whispered. Alexander's smile could have powered half of Manhattan. Yeah. Emma leaned down to kiss him, soft and sweet and full of promise. So, what do we do now? Now, Alexander said, standing and pulling her up with him, we go destroy Jonathan Ashford together. The confrontation took place in the conference room of Alexander's law firm, surrounded by enough legal firepower to level a small city. Jonathan arrived with his own team of attorneys, confident and smug, clearly expecting this to be a routine intimidation session. His confidence faltered the moment he saw Emma sitting at the table beside Alexander. No longer the broken woman he'd encountered at the hospital. Emma, he said, his tone falsely warm. I'm surprised to see you here. I thought you'd learn to avoid situations above your current station. Careful, Jonathan, Alexander said quietly. My lawyers are recording everything. Jonathan's smile tightened. I'm simply concerned about an old friend. Emma, surely you don't believe whatever story Alexander has been telling you about our business arrangement. Your father's company failed because he made poor decisions, not because of any impropriety on my part. Is that what you call embezzling $2.7 million from the employee pension fund? Emma asked calmly. The silence that followed was deafening. Jonathan's face went white, and his lawyers began frantically whispering among themselves. I have no idea what you're talking about, Jonathan said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Alexander slid a thick folder across the table. Bank records, email correspondence, forged documents. We have everything, Jonathan. Every illegal transfer, every falsified report, every lie you told to cover your tracks. Jonathan opened the folder with shaking hands, his face growing paler with each page. This is fabricated. You can't prove any of this. We can and we have, one of Alexander's attorneys said smoothly. The FBI is very interested in these documents, Mr. Ashford. They'll be contacting you later today. You destroyed my family, Emma said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. You destroyed people's retirement funds, their life savings. For what? To fund your lifestyle? To buy more expensive toys? Jonathan's mask finally slipped, revealing the desperate, cornered man beneath. You have no idea what it was like being engaged to the Princess of Ashford International while having to scrape by on my salary. Everyone expected me to be wealthy, to be worthy of you. I needed that money. You needed it? Emma's laugh was bitter. Jonathan, I never cared about money. I cared about honesty, loyalty, love, things you apparently never understood. You say that now, but you were different then. You lived in a world where money was just there. You never had to worry about it. And now I do, Emma replied. I've been working as a waitress for 3 years, Jonathan. I've lived paycheck to paycheck, worried about bills, made decisions based on what I could afford instead of what I wanted. And you know what? I'm happier now than I ever was with you. Jonathan's gaze shifted to Alexander, his expression becoming vicious. And you think he's different? You think Alexander Hayes gives a damn about anything other than profit? He's using you, Emma. Once the novelty wears off, once he gets bored of playing savior, he'll discard you just like you did. Alexander's voice was dangerously quiet. The difference, Jonathan, is that I actually love her. Not her money, not her connections, not what she can do for my image. Her. You barely know her. I know enough, Alexander replied, echoing the words he'd spoken to Emma weeks ago. I know she's brave and kind and strong enough to rebuild her life from nothing. I know she's loyal enough to take care of her mother without expecting gratitude or recognition. I know she's forgiving enough to serve coffee to strangers in a storm, even strangers who might have hurt her family. Jonathan looked between them, seeing something in their expressions that made his shoulders slump in defeat. The FBI will be here in an hour, Alexander continued. You have two choices. You can cooperate, return the stolen funds, and hope for leniency, or you can continue lying and face the full consequences of what you've done. If I cooperate, Jonathan asked quietly, what happens to me? That's not up to us, Emma said. That's up to the justice system. But Jonathan, for what it's worth, I hope you find a way to become the man I once thought you were. Even in her moment of triumph, Emma couldn't help but show compassion. It was, Alexander thought, one of the many reasons he loved her. 3 hours later, Emma and Alexander sat in the back of his car as they drove toward Albany. Jonathan had been arrested, the funds were being restored, and Emma's family name was being cleared. It should have felt like vindication, but Emma mostly felt tired. How are you doing? Alexander asked gently. I keep thinking about the person I was 3 years ago, Emma replied. So naive, so trusting. I would have never imagined that someone I loved could betray me so completely. Do you regret it being trusting? Emma considered this. No, I regret being stupid about Jonathan, but I don't regret being the kind of person who believes in people. That's what led me to trust you after all. Alexander took her hand, intertwining their fingers. Speaking of trusting me, there's something I want to ask you. What? Alexander reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Emma's heart stopped. I know this is fast, he said quickly. I know we've only known each other for a few weeks, and I know we're in the middle of legal proceedings and media attention and general chaos. But Emma, I don't want to wait anymore. I don't want to spend another day without being sure that you're mine and I'm yours. He opened the box, revealing a stunning solitaire diamond that caught the light and threw rainbows across the car's interior. I love you, Alexander continued. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy. Will you marry me? Emma stared at the ring, then at Alexander's hopeful, nervous face. A few weeks ago, she'd been convinced that love was a luxury she couldn't afford. Now, looking at this man who'd fought for her, believed in her, seen her at her worst, and somehow loved her anyway. Are you sure? She asked. Really sure? Because once you marry me, you're stuck with all of this. The media attention, the complicated family history, the fact that your future wife used to be a waitress. Emma, Alexander said with a laugh, I fell in love with the waitress. Everything else is just bonus. Emma looked at the ring again, this symbol of promise and forever, and felt something settle into place in her chest. Hope, yes, but also certainty. Yes, she said, smiling through happy tears. Yes, I'll marry you. As Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, Emma thought about Murphy's words from that day in the diner. Sometimes the world surprises you. Sometimes the best love stories are the ones you never see coming. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the storm that seems like it's going to destroy your life turns out to be the thing that saves it. 6 months later, Emma stood in the bridal suite of the Ashford estate, the family property that had been restored to her as part of the legal settlement, adjusting her grandmother's pearls for the third time. Through the window, she could see guests gathering on the lawn where she and Alexander would be married in less than an hour. You're glowing, her mother said from behind her. Emma turned to see Margaret Ashford standing in the doorway, looking healthier and happier than she had in years. The stress of her medical bills was gone. Her treatments were going well, and discovering that her daughter was not only alive but thriving had given her a new lease on life. I'm nervous, Emma admitted. Good nervous or bad nervous? Good nervous. Definitely good nervous. Emma smoothed her hands over the silk of her wedding dress, a simple but elegant design that made her feel like herself, not like she was playing a part. Mom, are you sure you're okay with all this? The media attention, the publicity? Margaret laughed, moving to help Emma with her veil. Darling, I'm proud of you. Proud of how you survived, how you rebuilt your life, how you found love again after everything that happened. If the price of that is some newspaper attention, I'll gladly pay it. Even though I lied to you for 3 years. You protected me, Margaret corrected gently. There's a difference, and now I get to see my daughter marry a man who clearly adores her in the garden where she played as a child. I'd say things worked out exactly as they were supposed to. A knock at the door interrupted them. "Come in," Emma called. Murphy entered, looking distinguished in his rented tuxedo. Alexander had insisted that Murphy walk Emma down the aisle, and Emma couldn't imagine anyone else in that role. "Ready, kiddo?" Murphy asked, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Ready," Emma confirmed, taking his offered arm. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of perfect moments. Emma's college friends had flown in from around the world, mixing with Alexander's business associates and creating an unlikely but harmonious gathering. The press was kept at a respectful distance, and for once Emma didn't mind the attention. Let the world see how happy she was. Alexander stood at the altar, looking devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo, but it was his expression when he saw her walking toward him that made Emma's heart race. Wonder, love, and something that looked like amazement, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. "You're beautiful," he whispered when she reached him. "You're not bad yourself," Emma replied, making him laugh. The ceremony was short and personal, officiated by a judge who was an old friend of Margaret's. When it came time for vows, Emma and Alexander had chosen to write their own. "Emma," Alexander began, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "3 months ago I thought I knew what I wanted from life. Success, power, control over my environment. Then you served me coffee in a snowstorm and reminded me that the best things in life can't be bought, controlled, or planned for. You taught me that kindness is strength, that vulnerability is courage, and that love is the only investment that always pays dividends." Emma felt tears threatening as Alexander continued. "You've made me a better man, not because you tried to change me, but because you made me want to change myself. You've shown me what it means to fight for something that matters, to protect the people you love, and to build a life based on more than just ambition. I promise to love you, support you, and make you laugh every day for the rest of our lives. And I promise to always remember that the luckiest thing that ever happened to me was getting stuck in a blizzard." Emma dabbed at her eyes with the handkerchief Murphy had insisted she carry, then took Alexander's hands. "Alexander," she began, "6 months ago I was convinced that my life was essentially over, that I'd used up my share of happiness and would spend the rest of my days hiding from the world. Then you walked into my diner, arrogant, demanding, and completely out of place, and somehow saw something in me that I'd forgotten was there." Alexander's smile was soft and encouraging. "You didn't try to rescue me or fix me. Instead, you stood beside me while I learned to fight for myself again. You've shown me that love isn't about finding someone to complete you. It's about finding someone who makes you want to be the best version of yourself. You've given me back my courage, my hope, and my faith in happy endings." Emma's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "I promise to love you not just when life is easy, but especially when it's hard. I promise to be your partner in building something beautiful together, whether that's a business, a family, or just a really excellent cup of coffee. And I promise to never let you forget that sometimes the best things happen when you're brave enough to step out of your comfort zone and help a stranger in a storm. By the power vested in me by the state of New York," the judge announced, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Alexander, you may kiss your bride." Alexander cuped Emma's face in his hands, his touch gentle and reverent. "I love you, Mrs. Hayes." "I love you too, Mr. Hayes." Their kiss was sweet and full of promise, and when they broke apart to the sound of applause and cheering, Emma felt like her heart might burst from happiness. The reception was held in the same garden under strings of lights that turned the early evening into magic. Emma and Alexander's first dance was to "At Last" by Etta James, and as they swayed together, Emma marveled at how perfectly they fit. "So," Alexander murmured in her ear, "nigh regrets about marrying the man who helped ruin your family fortune?" "Well," Emma replied thoughtfully, "you did make quite an impressive case for yourself, restoring my inheritance, clearing my family name, putting my ex-fiancé in federal prison. You really know how to woo a girl. I had good motivation," Alexander said, spinning her gently. "Speaking of which, I have something for you." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "Wedding present." Emma opened it to find legal documents transferring ownership of Murphy's Diner to her name, along with a business plan for expanding the restaurant into a chain. Alexander, this is too much. It's not enough, he interrupted. Emma, that diner is where we met. It's where you showed me what real hospitality looks like, what genuine kindness can accomplish. I want to help you turn it into something bigger, something that can employ people from the community and serve families for generations. Emma looked up at him, overwhelmed. You want to go into the restaurant business? I want to go into the Emma business, Alexander corrected. Whatever makes you happy, whatever lets you use your talents and your heart to make the world better. That's the business I want to be in. Emma stood on her tiptoes to kiss him, not caring that half of New York society was watching. Have I mentioned lately that I love you? Not in the last 5 minutes, Alexander replied. I was starting to worry. I love you, Emma said against his lips, and I love our life. And I love that we're going to spend the next 50 years annoying each other and making each other laugh. 50 years? Alexander raised an eyebrow. That's all. Okay, 60. But only if you promise to still make me coffee in the mornings when we're 80. Deal. Alexander agreed, sealing the promise with another kiss. As the evening progressed, Emma found herself surrounded by love and laughter. Murphy regaled anyone who would listen with stories about his girl and how he'd known from the beginning that Alexander was special. Her mother was in deep conversation with several of Alexander's friends, already planning future family gatherings. Even some of Alexander's stuffier business associates seemed to be genuinely enjoying themselves. Quite a transformation, a voice said behind her. Emma turned to find David Chen, the tech mogul who'd been part of the group stranded in the storm. From that night at the diner to this, David clarified, gesturing to the elegant reception. It's like a fairy tale. The best kind, Emma agreed, the kind where the princess saves herself and finds out the prince was worth saving too. Speaking of that night, David said with a grin, I hope you know you've ruined fine dining for all of us. Alexander made us try Murphy's apple pie at his bachelor party, and now nothing else compares. Emma laughed. I'll make sure Murphy knows he has new fans. As the night wound down and guests began to leave, Emma and Alexander stood together at the edge of the garden, looking up at the stars. Emma's head was on Alexander's shoulder, her hand in his, the wedding ring catching moonlight. So, Alexander said softly, what do you think? Was it worth it? All the drama and complications and newspaper headlines? Emma considered this, thinking about everything that had brought them to this moment. The storm, the betrayal, the fear, the fighting back, and finally this peace, love, and the promise of forever. You know what's funny? She said, 3 years ago, I thought my life was over because I lost everything I thought I wanted. If someone had told me then that I'd end up happier than I'd ever been married to someone I met while working at a diner, you'd have thought they were crazy. Clet, Emma agreed, but now I realize I wasn't losing my life back then. I was just making room for a better one. Alexander pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I love your better life, especially the part where I get to be in it. Forever, Emma said, turning in his arms to face him through storms and sunshine and whatever comes next. Forever, Alexander agreed, and kissed her under the stars. As they walked hand in hand back toward the house, their house now filled with friends and family, in the promise of new memories to be made, Emma thought about Murphy's words from that day so many months ago. Sometimes the world surprises you. Sometimes it gives you exactly what you didn't know you were looking for, wrapped up in a snowstorm and served with a side of the best coffee in upstate New York. And sometimes, if you're very, very lucky, it gives you a love story that starts with a stranger in a storm and ends with forever. The end.